Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Sheila Segerson, Director of Shelter Solutions with Maddie's Fund. Today, we are joined by Dr. Jacqueline Ellis, who is the Director of Behavior at Toronto Humane Society. Welcome, Dr. Ellis. It's wonderful to have you here today, and I'm really looking forward to this presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm always so delighted to present at Maddie's Fund. I always find that the audiences are so engaged and they just ask such great questions. So I am super happy to be here. So again, I am Dr. Jacqueline Ellis, Director of Behavior at Toronto Humane Society. And today I'm going to speak to you about my struggles with how to manage under-socialized cat cases in shelters, which is an ethical challenge that I'm sure all of you here today can probably relate to. We all love awesome adoption stories. Seeing our favorite animals go home can be just so rewarding and so heartwarming, but it can be even more amazing when we find matches for under-socialized cats because let's face it, they're just miserable in shelters and they often have very long lengths of stay. But is it amazing, right? Just because we can find them an adopter, it doesn't mean it's necessarily in everyone's best interest. Um, is the cat truly happy there? And did the adopter get the companion that they were truly looking for? There can also be pressure from well-intentioned members of the public to place all cats. There are even people who equate barn placements with giving up on them or abandoning them. And I just don't think that's the case. At Toronto Humane Society, our mission statement is to improve the lives of animals. And that means that adoption is not necessarily our goal. We need to consider what would improve the lives of each individual animal. So there's no doubt that cats can be socialized, but there may be a ceiling to this effect that would depend on many factors. So how socialized they can actually get might depend upon things as their previous experience with humans, their current age, what age those previous experiences happened at, and what resources are available to actually conduct the socialization process in a methodical way. So the Association of Shelter Veterinarians produced their most recent copy of their guidelines for standards of care in animal shelters in December 2022. And one phrase that really stands out to me is long-term confinement of any animal who cannot be provided with basic care without inducing stress or compromising safety is unacceptable. And at least to me, this statement evokes an under-socialized cat more than any other case I can think of. So the question becomes, so if we're deciding it is just unacceptable to house under-socialized cats in shelters for long periods of time, what do we do? How do we identify a fearful cat from a truly under-socialized cat? So Slater and colleagues produced a series of studies, and their first study that looked at this just was kind of trying to assess how shelters were already doing this. And they found that most shelters were just kind of assessing this based on presumption, and that only 15% of shelters even had written protocols of what they were basing these presumptions on, which is really kind of astounding considering how much of a difference this can make on their quality of life long term. So then they produced a series of studies kind of looking at how they could try to make this assessment more scientific. And I'm going to really kind of give a very broad overview of these four remarkable studies. But basically, they took 297 cats with a known socialization history, and those cats underwent several structured behavioral tests over a 3-day period. They were very simple tests with very simple measures, and they just compared those measures from those tests to the cat's known socialization histories to see which ones were good at predicting or knowing what their previous known socialization history was, and the ones that were not good at it they dropped, and the ones that were quite good at it and really improved the test's ability to predict what that socialization history was, they retained. And so eventually they were left with a combination of a few tests that could really, really well, that were really, really good at differentiating between cats based on their likelihood of being socialized. And that resulted in the Feline Spectrum Assessment. I'm going to call it the FSA from now on. And there you can find the training manual and guide on their website readily. It's in the references at the end, the website specifically. I mean, you can just Google it, but the website is in my reference slide at the end of this presentation if you're interested in finding it. And it basically breaks down this assessment into 4 mini tests that are conducted over a maximum of 3 days. And basically, there's a couple of behaviors that you can just stop immediately and say, the cat's socialized, there's no problem. But even if you go through the full test paradigm, it's really a maximum of 20 minutes. So it doesn't take all that much time to get this great answer. And I'm going to show you what the tests are because they are so simple. They really are. It doesn't require a lot of training or really a huge expertise in cat behavior. Really, you just have to know body language and be able to follow the instructions in this manual. It's pretty simple. So the first test is greeting the cat.
Hi, kitty. What you doing? What a pretty kitty. What you doing? Come here.
So basically, it's 30 seconds. You do something very simple, and then there's a list of behaviors, and you check yes or no to whether or not they performed them. So that's the first test. The second test
Hi,
is
kitty.
crack door. And again, there's just a list of specific behaviors. Did they perform this behavior? Yes, no. And those behaviors were determined by seeing if they were actually predicted in this group of known behavioral history cats. The third test is toy. And then the fourth and final test is wand. Now, this test is a little bit longer because there's 2 sort of subsections to it. One is just presenting the wand, and then the second is attempting to pat the cat on their shoulder. So you can see that these tests are simple, don't require a lot of resources, don't require a lot of expertise. You're just taking yes or no to a bunch of boxes. And they produce an answer at the end when you tabulate the results to how likely the cat is to be socialized. And there's 5 potential categories. So a cat might be found to be extremely unlikely to be socialized, unlikely to be socialized, likely to be socialized, extremely likely to be socialized, or just socialized. And then you can use these results to help you determine whether you think that cat is appropriate for life in a traditional home environment or not. Importantly, the program itself does not provide pathway recommendations. It just feeds you the information to make the decisions that are right for your organization. I found the FSA has been a remarkable game changer as a tool in our toolbox for making these decisions because it is data driven and scientifically validated, and it's a really powerful, especially when you're discussing with people who might be a little bit hesitant to participate in these, to think it's a reasonable choice to participate in these barn placement programs. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Toronto Humane Society makes these pathway decisions. So what is the appropriate choice for these cats, these under socialized cats? So the first thing that we do is we may consider offering TNR as an option before the cat even is intaken into our organization. When people approach us about taking in cats that we do not think right away, based on the information they give us, are appropriate for probably going to life in a traditional home environment, we'll offer this option. But once the animal is already in our facility, once we've already intaken them, if they're flagged for presenting behavioral challenges, and this is true for any cat or dog or rabbit, but we're speaking specifically about under socialized cats here. But once an animal is flagged for presenting with behavioral challenges, we will do a thorough case review, looking at all of the information that's available. For example, information gathered at intake, whether that's on the intake form or behavior exhibited during the intake exam. And importantly, we have an intake form for owner surrendered cats, of course, but we also have an intake form for stray cats. Of course, a person bringing in a stray cat is not going to have as much information as an owner might, but they are going to have some. So information such as, how did you get the cat in this carrier? Did you just pick them up and put them in? Did you lure them in? Did you bait it and then close it behind them? Super helpful. How did the cat respond to your attempts at petting if you found them outside? Did they enjoy it? Did they tolerate it? Did they avoid it? Did you not even attempt it? These little pieces of information just add so much to the picture. The veterinary findings can help inform how to go forward as well. And of course, we do conduct the FSA. And at Toronto Humane Society, at least, we mostly really consider barn placement or alternative placement as a pathway for those cats that come out as extremely unlikely to be socialized or unlikely to be socialized. While they're waiting barn placement, or even while we're still deciding, usually we do put them on a behavior modification plan, and we'll look at the progress they're making in that plan. And then, of course, behavioral observations made ad hoc at any time can be helpful in capturing some of those more rare behaviors. So once we've done this case review, we make a plan and implement treatment. So the plan might be what their pathway is, but it's also going to include other things. We, at least, do have a difficult time finding appropriate barn placement locations. And so it can take a little bit between making the decision that this is the pathway we're pursuing and actually getting to kind of fulfill that. And so during that time, we will put them on behavior modification plans. And there might be other treatment things that we implement as well. And what's really important, and I think often missed, is that follow-up and reassessment. So we make this plan, we implement these treatments, but then what happens, right? So it's possible that the cat shows a lot of improvement that perhaps we didn't expect, and that might cause us to change the pathway that we end up pursuing. Or maybe they're not showing progress, in which case maybe we should be reassessing the approach we're taking and try a different tactic. And then eventually they do end up in one of three outcome categories. So one is adoption. Perhaps they have shown improvement, and we do an improvement in terms of their perception of humans and their behavior in that regard, in which case we will pursue adoption. Sometimes we do go through with the alternative placement. And sometimes cats are euthanized. Now, we would never euthanize a cat simply due to being under socialized. But it is possible that an under-socialized cat might also have a concurrent medical condition that means that we cannot treat them due to the behavior that they're exhibiting. And so sometimes these cats will end up being euthanized because we can't simply do right by them in terms of their medical conditions. So that's all well and good to walk you through the process, but it's obviously much easier to understand when you think of it in terms of a few examples. So I'm going to tell you a story about Zenith and about Montana. So these are two cats that underwent this exact process. Zenith, his FSA revealed he was unlikely to be socialized. And Montana, her FSA revealed she was extremely unlikely to be socialized. So for both of these cats, we decided to pursue an alternative placement. But while we were waiting for that, we gave them the same treatment. It just so happened that the same treatments worked out for them. So they both got placed in out of cage space. So we have some kind of small rooms that cats can live in that are outside of the busy areas of the shelter when they're under socialized. We also had social companions for them. So these two cats happened to also come in with other cats so that they already knew and they were able to live in these environments. And I find that so helpful for the welfare of cats that don't enjoy anything else that we try to give them, right? We aren't able to improve their lives by playing with them. Often they won't even eat in front of us. So we can't use food. Or obviously we're not using petting here. And so they're kind of we're at a loss of how to actually give them moments of joy. And we find that although these cats are not socialized towards humans, they're often quite socialized towards other cats. And so living with a social companion that they know and they're comfortable with and that is of a species that they are socialized to can be one of the few things that we can give them to give them moments of this relief, of moments of joy. We work with our veterinary team on psychopharmaceuticals when appropriate to help facilitate the learning that is involved in the behavior modification plans that we do implement. I won't go into details too much here. I have given some Maddie's Fund webinars in the past about the behavior modification plans that we use. So if you're interested, I invite you to go check those out. But we have two ones we just call the positive association BMOD. That's the one that we use before they'll eat in front of us. And once they'll eat in front of us, we start on the desensitization and counter conditioning to touch behavior modification plan. And then, of course, we also do case updates once a week where we review their data and how they're doing, what improvements they're making or lack thereof. So, Zenith in Montana. So we're going to go through some of the data that we get from these BMOD plans that we help to drive decision-making processes during our reassessments. So I won't go into too much detail about these scores. These are the response to petting scale, the fear, anxiety, and stress scale, the participation in play scale, and the food intake scale. And they are all 0 to 5, where 5 is the worst and 0 is the best. And you can see that we have these tracked over time during our behavior modification plans. And so these ordinal scales, I generally like to think of as anything 3 or greater is not good. Is poor welfare. Anything lower than 3, I generally tend to think of as at least acceptable. 0, of course, is good, and so on up from there. So we can see when looking at Zenith scores that both Zenith and Montana started at like primarily 5, so really all their scores. But for Zenith, over time, he really did start to trend downwards, and by the end of it, we can see that most of his scores are really under that red line. Whereas Montana, you can see that Montana's food intake score went down, which meant she was eating enough, right? Her food intake started to go up. So that's a good indicator of welfare, but it's not enough, right? We're still seeing she has very high FAS. She's not enjoying petting. We don't even see her response. She's not enjoying play. We don't even see her response to petting score on here at all, which means that people are not even trying to pet her. Because part of the plan is you are not supposed to attempt petting unless you think it's going to be received well. So she was giving enough behavior signs that they weren't even trying. So that is showing us these ordinal scales are really telling us something about their welfare and their progress. But we also collect something called a summary score. And so that is 5 behaviors, yes or no to each behavior. 2 of the behaviors are undesirable behaviors. Hiss, growl, swat, bite. They get a -1 if they exhibit either of those behaviors during the session. And then they get a +1 if they eat in front of you, if they play in front of you, or if they emerge from hiding in front of you. And then you get a summary score that can be as low as -2 and as high as 3. And so let's look at Zenith and Montana's summary scores. So there's a pretty dramatic difference between Zenith and Montana in these scores. So for Zenith, well, both Zenith and Montana started at 0. That's not great. We really want to be seeing positive numbers here. But we can see over time, Zenith really got all the way up to 3 and then was consistently showing 3s. And so that's a pretty good sign for Zenith. Whereas Montana, we do get a positive score at least once, but overall, we're seeing 0s or lower, and we're definitely not seeing a trend towards improvement here either. Then during the desensitization and counter conditioning BMOD plan, we also score their response. So this one is a score of, well, it's actually 0 to 10, but I couldn't get PowerPoint to start at 0. So here it's 1 to 11. But so whereas 1 here is wouldn't even eat off the stick. In summary, the plan is we try to get them to eat off a long stick, and then our hand gets closer and closer on the stick over time. And then eventually we introduce a second hand, which eventually starts petting them. And then finally, they enjoy petting without even needing the food. That's the basics of the plan. 0 or 1 is the worst score, and 10 or 11 is the best score. So let's look at the graphs for this. Pretty dramatic difference between Zenith and Montana here. So we can see Montana at no point even ate off the stick for us. Whereas Zenith had several days in a row of being at the same state and eventually a dramatic improvement. It wasn't consistent 100% over time, but remember 10 is enjoying petting without even needing food. We are seeing a pretty high number of scores that are 8s, 9s. It's very, very dramatic difference at very least between the two. So eventually we did decide to end up adopting out Zenith and barn placing Montana. And so you can see how we made those decisions. However, not all cases are quite as clear-cut as Zenith and Montana. Meet Carl. Carl was found to be unlikely to be socialized by the FSA. But let's look at his scores that we got while we were waiting for barn placement to become available. So in the top box, you can see his ordinal scales. And again, over the red line is bad, under the red line is at least reasonable. And we see that over time, he did start getting some more scores that were under the red line. But we're really not seeing that continued downward trend of these. It's kind of plateauing, and it's really on both sides of the red line. In the bottom left-hand score, we see a similar picture. We can see that summary score did go up, and we are seeing some 3s, which is fantastic, but we continue to see negative scores as well. And it's not it's not even a linear trend really at all, right? Like we're not seeing that score continuing to go up, which is really what you want to see. We're also seeing it go back down and not necessarily bouncing back up. And in terms of the DSCC BMOD score, we do see it go up, but then it kind of plateaus between 4 and 7, and we're not seeing it get all the way up to really even any of the scores that reflect enjoying petting. So we did ultimately pursue adoption for Carl because he had shown some improvement, and we are able to find adopters for these cats. But was adoption the right choice for Carl or cats like him? That was the next ethical question I struggled with. So first, I didn't even know really what plan we should be implementing with these cats. And then I didn't know how to monitor the progress to make kind of informed decisions. And now that I have at least a good plan for that, is the plan good enough? Is it good enough for them? But I wasn't really sure how to answer this question right off the hop. What I decided was to conduct a post-adoption study. And what I did was inquire about the behavior and adopter satisfaction of cats across socialization likelihoods. So I looked at all cats who had ever been tested by the FSA and compared between their results, likelihoods, as well as a control group of cats who had never been assessed by the FSA and therefore were never even suspected of being under-socialized. And it was a survey-based study. And so these are the sections I'm kind of breaking the survey down into for our discussion. So first was pretty simple. Just, do you still have this cat? There's a fair amount of information that you could potentially glean from simply that. Next were some behavior trait ratings, traits like fearfulness, affection, aggression, activity, things along those lines. And some situational behavior questions. So if you were to approach your cat and try to pet them, would they enjoy it, tolerate it, avoid you? Would they already be hiding? Things along those lines. And then finally, a few questions investigating the adopter experience. So just to kind of walk you through what the sample in this survey was. So we had 81 cats that had been assessed by the FSA in the time period we were looking at. Of those 81, 65 had eventually been adopted. So we surveyed all 65 of those. But of course, I can only actually analyze the behavior of the adopters who responded. So of the survey responses, we did have 57. And then we looked at a potential control group. So these are cats that had never been assessed by the FSA. We randomly selected 200 of them, and we got 155 responses from those cats, which is a response rate of 80%. Just to brag for a second, you almost never get response rates that are this good. So I was very, very encouraged by such high participation from our adopters. And just as a reminder, of the FSA cats, that is broken down from 5 potential responses, from extremely unlikely to be socialized to socialized. But I squished those into 3 different groups for a number of reasons. One, because we just didn't have the sample size to support looking at all 5 separately. So the first group that I'm going to be calling FSA 1 and 2 from now on, these are those least likely to be socialized cats. That's extremely unlikely to be socialized and unlikely to be socialized. These are the categories of cats that we look at barn placement for at Toronto Humane Society primarily. And we have kind of a middle category of the likely to be socialized cats. And then squished together again at the end, we have the cats who are found to be extremely likely to be socialized or just socialized. And as a reminder, these control cats, they were simply never suspected of being under socialized. So what did we find? So the first question was super interesting. Pretty much everyone still had the cat from both groups. So we had less than 2% of people who didn't still have their cats. Of those 2 cats in the FSA group who did not still have their cats, just for your interest, one was from the likely to be socialized category and one was from the unlikely to be socialized category. But there's not very much variation between the 2 groups here at all. So we don't get any statistically significant results here. But if we look at the behavior trait ratings, we do start to see a little bit more interesting results. So these are the behavior trait ratings that we looked at. Excuse me, fearfulness, playfulness, activity, aggression, affection, vocalness, and house soiling. And we looked at to see if there was a significant difference between the FSA cats and the control cats in all of these trait ratings. And 2 of them did show significant differences, fearfulness and affection. I'm going to show you the graph of the results, but it is a little bit complex, let's say. So I'm going to just walk you through the axes first. So at the bottom, you see from 1, absent, to 5, very common. So this was a Likert response. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how fearful is your cat? So if we're saying absent for fearfulness, that's good. That's what we want. We don't want the cat to be fearful. But for affection, we do want it to be very common. So they're kind of going to be on either side there. And then we're looking at fear on the top and affection on the bottom. And then you'll see within fear or affection, control is at the top. So these are those cats who are never identified as being under social, followed by the FSA 4 and 5. Those were the socialized or extremely likely to be socialized. And FSA 3 was that middle group, and FSA 1 and 2, those are those cats that are the least likely to be socialized. So what did we find? Looking at both of these graphs, you can see 35% of control cats, fearfulness was absent. So that's kind of how you read that. And the little triangles, those talk about significant differences between the colors. So you can see control cats were significantly more likely to have fearfulness absent than the other categories. That's a lot of information. All you really need to take away from this slide is that the biggest difference was not necessarily between the categories of FSA, but more so between the control cats and any of the FSA cats, right? So there are some significant differences between the FSA categories, but even just looking here, you can see that this bar is significantly shifted to the left, the control cats, compared to any of the FSA groups. And the same is true for the affection. So you can see that just in general, cats that we even selected to be assessed by the FSA were more fearful, were rated as more fearful and less affectionate by the adopters in their subsequent homes. In terms of the situational behavior questions, so we have a couple of different questions. The first one we're going to talk about is the response to approach. So this is, you can see on the bars over here, we have stranger and owner. So if a stranger were to approach your cat, how would they respond? Would they come towards them, stay in place, run away, or already be hiding? And that's for the stranger. And then there's also going to be a graph for the owner. And so we'll pull that out here and we can see that here are the graphs. And again, for the stranger, you see that same pattern, right? Where there are some differences between the different FSA categories, but we primarily see that the control is different from remarkably different from all of the FSA categories. And in the owner category, we see, well, with the exception of probably FSA 3, we tend to see that pattern repeating itself. So we're not seeing that, what I would have expected would have been to see kind of a graded response between, whereas the FSA 4 and 5 cats were the most like the control group, FSA 3 was less like it than them, and the FSA 1 and 2 were the least like the control group. But that's not really the pattern that we're seeing here, interestingly. However, that does start to change a little bit in this next situational behavior, which is response to petting. So again, the responses options are enjoy, tolerate, and avoid. And the question is, if a stranger was to try to pet your cat, how would they respond? And then if an owner was to try to pet your cat, like if you were to try to pet your cat, how would your cat respond? So looking at the stranger response, we see again that same pattern, right? We see that control cats are just super different than the FSA 1 and 2, any of the FSA cats, right? But once we look at that owner response to petting, so how does a cat respond to petting attempts from its owner? We start to see that exact pattern that I was describing, where I would expect to see control cats enjoy it the most, FSA 4 and 5 a little bit less, FSA 3 a little bit less than that, and FSA 1 and 2 even less. And we can see here that 85% of control cats enjoyed petting from their owner and 1% avoided it. Whereas in these FSA 1 and 2, we can see that 52% still did enjoy it, but 44% of them totally avoided petting even from their owner, their primary caregiver, right? And we can see just a whole whack of these triangles that I talked about before. The more triangles you see, the bigger the difference is between, statistically speaking, the bigger the difference is between these. So we can see that not only are control cats significantly more likely to enjoy and less likely to avoid than any of the other categories, but FSA 1 and 2 are significantly less likely to enjoy and more likely to avoid petting from their owner. And while 52% of them still did enjoy this petting from their owner, which is great, 44% of them did not. And I take pause at that number. It's easy for us to think that once these under-socialized cats get into homes, they will start to form these bonds with their primary caregiver. They will start to kind of warm up, open up, really start to enjoy petting them. But that's not what this is necessarily telling me for at least 44% of these cats. Once we start looking at adopter satisfaction, there's a couple of ways that I look at this. So the first is just simply asking, how satisfied were you? And we can see that by and large, everyone's pretty satisfied. They're calling themselves satisfied. But another way I chose to ask this question was to say, what environment do you think this cat would be happiest? And that's because the nature of my interest in this was, is a traditional home environment appropriate, or should I have barn placed these cats, right? And so we can see here a standard, that means standard home environment, living indoors with an owner. Outdoors was defined as living in an outdoor environment where shelter is provided, food is constantly provided, and the cats could choose to interact with people if they want to, but it's not forced. We can see, and then I don't know was I don't know. And we can see here that the control cats significantly by and large, people said standard home environment. Like that's like what, 95%, let's say. So that's a pretty clear answer. But when we look at the outdoors environment, we can see that these FSA 1 and 2 cats, those were the least likely to be socialized cats, they were significantly more likely, their adopters, to say, I think these cats might have been happier outside. Now, this is still like what, let's say 20% of people said that, and still 70% of those adopters said standard. So you might say, well, we are making the right choice then, right? 70% said yes to standard home environment. But I'm really concerned about those 20% of cats where even the owners are saying, I don't really think my cat's happy here, right? I don't love that for them. It gives me pause, at least. So the conclusions that I take away from this are that a couple. So first of all, is the FSA cats differ from the control cats just overall. They were more fearful, they were less affectionate, and they were more likely to have negative responses to strangers. This could be because under-socialized cats simply don't do well with novelty in general, and so that could be why they're fearful of novelty. Don't like strangers. Strangers are novel. Maybe they're just shy. But in general, that less affectionate, not seeing that evidence of the bond. So sorry, I'm getting on to my next point already. But yeah, so that could be why. But that FSA 1 and 2 cats difference does seem to be more meaningful. We're not seeing that pattern everywhere. So in general, FSA and control, different, regardless of FSA group, more or less. But the FSA 1 and 2 cats do have a more meaningful difference prominently in a couple of these categories. And those are, they are more likely to avoid petting from their owner, and they are more likely to be reported to be probably happiest outdoors. And I do think that those are some pretty significant findings that really do make me question if that was the right choice for them. And this supports the idea that under-socialized cats, as defined at least here by FSA 1 and 2, may not be appropriate for life in traditional home environments. That they do seem to have evidence of maybe poor welfare, a reduced owner experience, and we are in shelter work, we are here for the animals, but we're also here for our community that we serve. We really should be aiming to support both ends of the leash, right? And it is also some pretty good validation for the FSA as a tool. So yeah, that is kind of what I took away from that study. It does make me kind of a little bit more confident in my decisions to barn place some of these cats, which I think was something I at least struggled with at first, especially because of this pressure that you can get from, as I mentioned, well-meaning members of the public who can think negatively on it. I don't think we should be thinking negatively on it. We are here to make sure that we are serving these cats' needs as well as we can. And I do think that there's plenty of positives of a barn environment that just simply aren't available in a traditional home environment, especially for these under-social cats. So we're going to get into alternative placements now. So I will say that in general, the alternative placement process is understudied. I think there's a lot of room for in the future. I'd love to see some more studies coming out evaluating placement processes and what's the most effective, what is the least stressful, what has the best retention rate. I would love to see that. It doesn't exist really right now. So I'm just going to tell you what we do at Toronto Humane Society. So first, I want to just talk a little bit about options, alternative placement options. So we do tend to place primarily in barns. That may just be because of the part of the world that we're in, and that's what's mostly available. Maybe that's just what's mostly appropriate for the under-social cats that we place. But there are also brewery or winery options. In my experience, when I approach a brewery or a winery looking to try to place a cat, they're often looking for a super friendly cat that can be an extra added value to the customer's experience when they go to, have a flight of beer or a flight of wine. They also have this cool, fun barn cat that's kind of rubbing up against them. And those are not the cats we're placing. We did manage to place at least a few cats in these types of environments that we're not looking for that specifically, but we have found that a struggle. Although I did end up following a lot of very fun brewery cat social media accounts as a result. And then neighborhoods. This isn't quite as common, but I know they have a very successful program in Chicago specifically, where they have neighborhoods that were kind of just starting to have really big rodent population problems. And so they decided to kind of have community cats, neighborhood cats that were placed in programs just like this, that have been very successful at helping reduce the issues they were facing, as well as great for cats especially in an area that was facing kind of an overpopulation problem at the time. At Toronto Humane Society, we have some pretty strict standards of what we need the alternative placement to meet. So that is possibly one of the reasons we struggle to find locations, is because we're not shy about turning a place down very politely if it doesn't meet all the standards that we need. And the most important thing that the placement location has to have is the caregiver. So who the caregiver is, what they're willing to do, their ability to be available. So they need to be able to follow the manual and be willing to follow guidance. So I'm not looking for someone who's like, oh, I know what I'm doing, I'll do it all on my own. No. I need you to be willing to just go step by step with me, please. They also need to be available for regular communication. At the first part of this process, I will get in touch with them first once a day, then every 3 days, then every 7 days until the end of the process. I have found, for the most part, people are delighted to stay in contact with me, because either they want help and advice, or they want to share cool things that have happened, and all their friends think they're crazy for wanting to tell them all these details about their new barn cat. And they need to be on site daily. They don't necessarily need to live on site, but they certainly need to be there every day to make sure that they are there to feed and monitor the cats daily. They also need a building that has a warm area. what that actually has to look like. And I don't know where everyone at this webinar is coming from, but I live in Canada. So a warm area is very important. And so that can look like many things. It can be a heated barn. It can be a place that's sheltered from wind and precipitation and is outfitted with lots of winterized cat dens. It can look like a lot of things, but it needs to have a warm area. And it needs to always be accessible. So they can't shut the barn if they close the barn, the cat still needs to be able to get in. And it also has to be a relatively safe property. I know there's no way that we can guarantee that any property is 100% safe, but we can't have dogs that live on the property that we have reason to believe would be dangerous to these cats. So that would be a history of aggression towards cats, etc. Or a history of wildlife predation. So they can't come to us looking for a barn cat because their last ones were just carried off by a fox or something like that. We need to, and that is, to be honest, one that we struggle with a lot. Not that their last cat was necessarily taken off by a fox, but that they will say to them, tell me about what wildlife you see in your area. And they'll tell us, and the answer just simply doesn't put us at ease. And so that is one we struggle with a lot, but we do think it's important. And the property, at least the housing quarters of the cat, doesn't need to be away from busy roads. Fortunately, often in farms, the roads aren't that busy, but there certainly have been a couple cases where we're just not comfortable with how close that is to the road, and then the increase in hit by car potential that would then, of course, present. Selecting the cats can be one of the most important parts, of course. We want to make sure that there's a give and take between you don't want to select too many cats that perhaps could have done quite well in a home environment, but we also don't want to be putting cats in a home environment that we should have barn. So it's a very difficult decision sometimes. Excuse me, to be selected for placement in an alternative location, cats must meet one or more of the following criteria. So they have to come from, let's say, a colony or a hoarding case or another situation where we don't expect the cat to necessarily be comfortable in a conventional home. They also need to experience significant stress in the shelter environment, react negatively to being handled, including expressing fear or aggression, and they need to exhibit behavioral issues that do not resolve with treatment and that would preclude placement in a conventional home. So they need to meet one or more of those criteria. Often it is all of them. And then we need to use caution. It doesn't mean we can't place these cats, but we certainly need to think really hard about whether it's appropriate if a cat exhibits any of these criteria. So if they are friendly with a social disposition, that can be cause for us to pause. If they're unaccustomed to being outdoors, so let's say a cat from an overwhelmed caregiver, we used to call them hoarding situation, that cat might not be socialized to people, but do we think it would be appropriate for life outside? Or if they have ongoing health concerns or a need for ongoing medical treatment, that would certainly be something where we have to think what would be the likelihood of being able to medicate those, willingness of the barn caregivers to do that, and the negative repercussions of not doing it. And what if there are physical characteristics of the cat that might show evidence of their inability or reduced ability to thrive in an alternative location, as assessed by a DVM. So, for example, current coat condition. So if they come in, we often say with outdoor cats, if they come in with a great coat condition, that's probably a pretty good indicator, and other health parameters, it's probably a pretty good indicator they were thriving. Whereas if they come in a little bit shabbier, that might mean they were not doing well out there. Or a full mouth extraction. So you might think immediately like, oh, full mouth extraction, they should absolutely not be outdoors. But I used to have a cat that lived in my office who had no teeth and had soft paws on all of his claws. He killed 5 mice in a month. I was shocked. So they really can do quite well, even with the full mouth extraction, but we're certainly going to be very cautious about making that decision. And they absolutely are not suitable for barn placement if they have significant unresolved active health concerns or if they are declawed. So we absolutely will not place those cats. So just want to tell you a little bit about our process. This is what we do. So once a location is selected and once a cat is selected, the first step that we have to do is transport the cat out there. And so I transport all of these cats myself. I will take them out to the facility. I'll make sure that they have a little bit of I'll work with our veterinarians to make sure that they have an appropriate cocktail on board to reduce the stress of this transport and to help ease the transition into the, new environment. And I'll gather all the supplies. So the supplies are, we have food and water bowls, a huge amount of food to give, both dry and wet, to give to the people who live there. Litter boxes, we just use kind of like cardboard trays so that they can just pull them out and give a new one every time, because these are not cats that you want to be getting real up and close with during this period of time. We also give toys, hiding boxes, carriers, and dog crates. So they will live in the next phase during this acclimation period, which is the first, just the title we gave, the first phase. They will live in jumbo dog crates inside of a secondary containment area. So here I have a picture of a tack room. Often we use tack rooms, but there are a range of different things we'll use. So they have this secondary containment area, doors closed, and in there they will live in a dog crate. So we use jumbo dog crates, and we tend to use 2 dog crates. So you know how some dog crates have a door on the side and a door on the front? We'll take one of them, door on the side, and zip tie it to the door on the front. So they actually have a double set, like a 2 full jumbo dog crates. So they can have separated sleeping, play, resting areas from their litter. And so they can just have a little bit more space. I don't love the idea of these cats living in these crates for that period of time. But to be honest, they've been living in the shelter. It's really just 2 weeks, and it really does aid them in having that gradual introduction to more space so that they can start to see the area as their home. So that acclimation period, I will, as I mentioned, for the first little bit, I'll be texting with, I find that most of the farmers I work with prefer text big time. So I text with them every day for the first bit, then it gets to every 3 days, and then it gets to every 7 days. And at that 2-week period, we call it the transition period. So at that point, I instruct the caregivers to just open the dog crate door, leave the dog crate in there, continue feeding them at least in that room, because they're stay in that room, if not still in the dog crate. And so then they get a little bit more run of the area. So they expand their horizons, expand their environment gradually. Now they have access to this full tack room. They can still go back in the crate, but they don't have to. And they find lots of other hiding spots around the room. And they get used to the environment more gradually. After that transition period, which is 4 weeks in that tack room, provided we haven't encountered any issues, we will then go to the final stage, which is free range at large to the barn, to the farm, to whatever the environment is. So sometimes that means just leaving that tack room door open. But what I found the most success with is before this process even starts, if the barn caregiver is open to it, putting a cat flap door in that tack room. Because then we don't have the problem of what if somebody accidentally closes the tack room door or something like that. And then they continue to feed them in that tack room. The cats generally tend to continue to see that tack room as their home base. And that is a place that they continue to go back to, and is kind of like a homing beacon for them, is that room. And so then I continue to touch base with them very frequently during the 4 weeks after the time that they get free range to this barn and to this farm. And then at that point, provided everything's going great, we call that final. And then we'll process an adoption. Obviously, it's a free adoption, and it comes with a lot of perks for them, but we do call that an adoption at that point. And the microchip becomes registered to them. But we do have an ongoing relationship forever. So if they ever need to reach out to me or ask me questions, they're more than my door is open. And I find that they do. They love to send me pictures when they get the rare sighting of a cat doing something hilarious. I still get photos from them from many barn placements ago. Just looking at the time, hopefully I'm close to the end here, but I just want to talk a bit about the benefits, because there's benefits for everyone. For the cats, they get spayed, neutered, vaccinated, microchipped, the works. They also get more enrichment. No matter, like, my house is enriched to the nines, but this cat in this barn is simply getting more, right? They get relief from shelter conditions. Generally, the cats we're selecting hate it in the shelter, and they really do appreciate this a lot more. For the location owner, they get pest control. Let's face it, they're not generally doing this. Some people do, but it's rare that they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart just to give a home to a cat in need. They need help. These are working cats. This is optional, but this is certainly a service that we provide. We will offer free spay, neuter, vaccination, microchip for any other cats that are on the premises that do not already have those services performed. And for the shelter, It facilitates compliance with the ASB guidelines quote that I posted earlier, saying absolutely you should not be housing animals in a facility where you cannot meet their needs without causing undue stress. So it allows you to comply with that recommendation. And it also allows you to redirect resources that may have been being funneled towards helping these cats that weren't helping these cats, towards helping other animals where there might be more of a pronounced impact of those people hours. And food for thought. When I encounter people who kind of do tend to think of barn placement as abandoning cats, often these are the same people that are fine with TNR. They see that as a very reasonable process. So if we accept TNR cats as an ethical thing, how is barn placement different? Barn placement, at least the process we follow, actually has more safety and support and oversight mechanisms in play. So I advocate for changing our thinking about barn placements to be a little bit more in line with how we think about TNR. And at Toronto Humane Society, at the bottom line is we always want to act in the best interests of the cats. And I think about it this way. Under socialized cats placed in homes, they may become more socialized, right? That could happen. But they are likely to suffer greatly during this process. And they are likely to have less enriched environments, regardless of whether or not they become more socialized. And at least according to the research I presented earlier, where they ended up, the ceiling effect of how socialized they end up getting, at least for a large proportion of those cats, made me uncomfortable. If we place them in barns, they still may become more socialized, right? We saw that picture of this kitty, right? Like, this isn't one of the cats we barn placed, but like, we do sometimes get reports of cats becoming more socialized when we barn place them. And during that process, regardless of whether or not they do become more socialized, they're less likely to suffer during that process. And they're more likely to have this super enriched environment, regardless of the success or failure of them becoming more socialized. So that is the end of my thoughts on care and case management for under-socialized cats in shelters. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone wants to send me. Well, I'm happy to chat after this, of course, but then if you have any email questions. And then also, as I mentioned, if you wanted to look into any of these references, they are going to be present in the PDF as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ellis. Wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I just love the research that you're doing because it focuses so much just on the work that we're doing and doing better and trying to base the work we're doing on scientific data. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Not surprisingly, we do have a number of questions. So we're going to get started. The first one is probably one that you would expect. And that is, we often have cats that have a FSA of 1 or 2, but come from indoor homes. We usually lean towards euthanasia when cats have never lived outside previously. And you talked about kind of limitations, and so she's asking whether you have limitations on which cats go into barn homes, which you talked about. But I also want to add on to that. Does your organization tend to manage cats like this?
Sure. The very first question I would have in any one of those cases is, what is your intake information saying? So if it is a cat that came from a home where you are getting some reason to believe it was socialized or like had a history of positive interactions with humans, and it's just giving that, which could theoretically still give an FSA of 1 or 2, that's extremely unlikely to be socialized if they're showing that in a shelter, but there is evidence from their previous home environment to foster it would go. So that would be my very first tactic, is seeing how they do in one of our more experienced foster homes. I would probably also work on some BMOD in shelter. I mean, I have to work on BMOD in shelter. It takes me a long time, an embarrassingly long time to find barns sometimes. So I am going to be working on this BMOD. And I am very fortunate to have a very standardized behavior modification process and very experienced and dedicated volunteers who really are great at it. So I'd be hoping if I didn't see anything from their history that suggests that, And then I don't see success in behavior modification. I think I probably would lean towards attempting barn placement over euthanasia, but it would certainly be, they're in that use caution case, right? So there would be a lot of conversations. There would possibly be, we have like an ethics service at Toronto Humane Society that we're able to use when we do have these difficult questions that come up. So I might even explore bringing a case such as that to the ethics service so that we can have more input from a formalized process that's designed to answer exactly those type of questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. I know very difficult situations and appreciate your experience in this. Next question. Several people asked this question related to when was the data collected, the survey put out related to how long after the animals had been placed or adopted for controls and for the study cats?
Short answer, I don't remember. I noticed that they just dropped a link to my research paper in the chat. I want to say it was at least 1 year after, but I am not swearing to that. Let me look at this real quick, but I don't know how long that'll take me to find out. So I might just direct you towards that paper to look at that. It's embarrassing that I can't remember, but it's better to say I don't know than to give you an answer and it be wrong.
Yeah. And do you remember at all whether it was a range of time or it was probably a range of time
It would have
after
been a range of time because we don't have as large of intake numbers as many shelters I see in our community do. And so to have even whatever it was, 80, 61, whatever it was, cats that actually even underwent the FSA, that would have had to have been over a long period of time in order to get even that sample size. So it certainly was a range. So even the cat that was in the home the least amount of time, let's say that was 6 months. The one that would have been in the home the most amount of time would have been longer.
Okay.
Much longer.
Thank you. Next question is, did you consider looking at other positive behaviors beyond petting? Could the FSA 1 and 2 cats show positive vocalizations, resting near owners without touching, solo or object play behavior?
So we did look at, so the problem with research, especially surveys, is you can ask a gazillion questions, but especially for surveys, response rate and completion rate really are driven by the length of the survey sometimes. So I do like to try to cut it down. So there's always a give and take between asking every possible question you can imagine and keeping it so that you're going to get a completion rate that's acceptable. So I did ask about those in a roundabout way. So I asked about playfulness, not necessarily solo play or object play separately. I did ask about playfulness, and I did ask about aggression, and I did ask about one of the questions in the situational questions was, if you're the owner and you approach your cat, are they coming right towards you, like meeting you halfway? Are they chilling out where they are? Are they running away, or are they already hiding? So that kind of gives you some of the information about the last thing that you mentioned, which was kind of just like resting near owner. Does it ask that exact question? No, but it does tell you, was this cat already hiding? Is going to tell you they weren't doing that. That's for sure. So yes and no, I suppose.
Okay. We are just about out of time, but I'm going to ask one more question that hopefully we can get a quick response to, and that is, do you factor in the use of rodenticides at the placements in terms of evaluating the safety of the placement?
Yes. I will say that when I evaluate the placement locations, I'm not the only person involved in that process. And I tend to ask primarily the behavior related questions. And then my colleague asks a lot of those kind of other types of questions. So I know that she does ask about them, but I couldn't speak too specifically about what the acceptable answers versus unacceptable answers are.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do have a number of more questions that we haven't had time to get to. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Those questions will be answered on Maddie's Pet Forum. Thank you so much, Dr. Ellis, for being here today.
My pleasure, and I'm happy to answer any questions offline, either through the Pet Forum or if somebody wants to email me for more information. I'm always available for, I think that there's nothing more important than networking between organizations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for watching today's webcast. As mentioned, Dr. Ellis will be available via email and on Maddie's Pet Forum to continue the discussion. Thank you all for being here today. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.